A brilliant summoning ritual finally succeeds, pulling a man named Yard into another world. Princess Sophia welcomes him with hope, believing he is the hero destined to save her kingdom. While everyone expects surprise or gratitude, Yard remains calm. He immediately realizes he was forcefully summoned from another world, and regrets letting curiosity get the better of him. After examining the magic circle, Yard quickly identifies countless flaws. The spell wastes an absurd amount of mana and relies on crude formulas. Looking around the room, Yard notices outdated architecture and magical tools. Yard recalls Sophia mentioning he was the fourth summoned hero. Assuming the spell selects people meeting specific conditions, Sophia tries desperately to get his attention, but Yard's focus drifts elsewhere. Instead of listening, he silently analyzes her physical features as if collecting research data. Regaining his composure, Yard politely introduces himself as a tactical magic researcher. He asks Sophia why he was summoned, and she leads him toward the royal audience chamber. Along the way, Sophia explains that the Alien Kingdom has fought the Dalo Magic Empire for generations. The Empire broke an ancient taboo by unleashing terrifying monsters onto the battlefield. Unable to stop the monsters alone, the king placed all his hopes on the legendary hero summoning ritual as the kingdom's final chance for survival. Before the gathered heroes, the king humbly bows his head and begs for assistance. Refusing to be manipulated by emotion, Yard points out that they were essentially kidnapped into another world. Sophia boldly offers herself as a reward, hoping to persuade him. Instead of rejecting the proposal outright, Yard calmly states he needs a far more meaningful offer before considering any cooperation. Unlike Yard, hero Alex immediately swears to protect the kingdom. The priestess gladly supports him, while Yard silently questions how easily the others accepted the situation. Watching the heroes volunteer without negotiation leaves Yard speechless. The king praises their noble hearts, making it even harder for him to oppose everyone else. Cheers erupt throughout the castle as the heroes receive overwhelming admiration. Exhausted by the pressure, Yard finally agrees to participate. Although Sophia worries about him, he insists he simply wants to end the exhausting discussion. With the introductions complete, Alex proudly reveals his enchanted sword, claiming its spirit possesses the power needed to defeat the Empire's monstrous army. Priestess Ferris introduces herself next, explaining that her sacred healing magic can restore even fatal injuries as long as life still remains. As every summoned hero reveals extraordinary abilities, Yard quietly observes from the sidelines. Alex and Ferris proudly declare that with the blessings of spirits and divine power, victory is guaranteed. Yard quietly listens, growing increasingly interested in the strange source of their abilities. After hearing their explanations, Yard concludes that magic in this world depends on borrowing power from gods or spirits instead of mastering magic itself. To him, their system resembles the earliest stage of magical civilization. Sophia hesitates after hearing Yard's blunt evaluation, while Ferris laughs it off. From Yard's perspective, relying entirely on outside powers makes both of them look incredibly primitive. Sophia excitedly praises the summoned heroes as legendary figures, unable to hide her admiration. Meanwhile, Yard sinks deeper into disappointment, realizing the kingdom has completely misunderstood what true magical talent looks like. Another summoned hero, Sagami Ryuhei, modestly introduces himself. He explains that he served in military reconnaissance rather than frontline combat and possesses abilities different from the others. Sagami demonstrates his craft magic by instantly creating a small weapon. Although the feat is useful, he admits his magic is practical rather than overwhelmingly powerful. Sophia eagerly compliments Sagami's ability before finally turning to Yard. With everyone's attention focused on him, he calmly steps forward to reveal his own magic. Yard casually states that he specializes in tactical support. He then effortlessly casts multiple advanced spells at once, ranging from destructive attacks to psychological interference, all without hesitation. Convinced everyone is speechless from witnessing overwhelming magic, Yard smiles with satisfaction. Instead, the room falls silent because nobody understands what they just witnessed. Confused expressions spread across the room until Alex suddenly notices Yard casting a fireball instantly without chanting. Only then do they realize something extraordinary has happened. Alex enthusiastically praises Yard's talent and insists they will rely on his support during battle. Rather than feeling appreciated, Yard becomes even more frustrated by their complete misunderstanding. Returning to his room, Yard collapses onto his bed. He realizes the world's magical standards are so low that even basic techniques appear miraculous to everyone around him. As Yard rests, Sophia sends warm water and introduces his personal maid. Tia, the cheerful maid, politely announces that she will serve all of Yard's daily needs from now on. The moment Tia approaches, Yard's automatic defensive magic activates on its own. His detection spell identifies an attempt to interfere with his mind, immediately warning him that something is wrong. Although Tia keeps smiling politely, she secretly panics. Her magical device fails to gather information on Yard, ruining her plan to seduce him before placing an enslavement bracelet on him. Realizing someone has already tried to manipulate him, Yard bursts into laughter. The failed scheme convinces him that the people around him are far easier to outsmart than expected. His expression suddenly turns cold. Yard decides there is no longer any reason to remain courteous inside a kingdom that has already attempted to deceive him. Pretending nothing happened, Yard asks Tia for a small favor. He hands her a coin and requests her help testing whether one of his world's magical spells can still function here. Tia obediently accepts the coin without suspecting anything unusual. Believing she has regained control of the situation, she unknowingly walks straight into Yard's carefully prepared countermeasure. As night falls over the kingdom, Yard quietly smiles to himself. Instead of waiting for his enemies to make the next move, he decides it is finally time to start asking the questions himself. Yard wakes up to find Tia sleeping beside him after spending the night in his room. After exposing her secrets, Tia grows more relaxed around Yard. She jokingly asks whether his overwhelming magic could simply wipe out both the Empire and the kingdom. Yard gives no immediate answer, quietly considering her question. Instead of boasting, he calmly weighs the consequences. With winter approaching and the demon army holed up in the Gross Fortress, Princess Margaret, the kingdom's second princess and supply operations commander, laid out her plan. Yard sat quietly to the side as officers praised Margaret's leadership. One remarked that she was the opposite of her sister Sophia, calling her arrogant and overconfident. Bent over the table tracing the path through 4 towns and 1 city, Margaret pointed out where monsters were known to gather. Yard's attention drifted from the strategy to her, and a thought crossed his mind about testing how far he could toy with her. Margaret snapped at him for not listening. Unbothered, Yard admitted to himself that if he ever became royalty, he'd want her first, though privately he still favored Sophia. Margaret turned on him sharply, demanding he speak up if he had any complaints about her strategy, reminding him it was an honor to sit in on such an important meeting. Ferris, his maid, nervously asked him to stop provoking the princess. Yard brushed off Margaret's question, claiming he was satisfied with the plan and had just been distracted by another thought entirely. The other heroes and knights watched as Margaret declared she had no real expectations for him. Thanking him only for staying quiet, she continued, comparing him unfavorably to the other heroes who had already lived up to legend, insisting the kingdom's own sorcerers could match his tricks with proper training. Margaret pressed further, calling him unnecessary and a hindrance. Someone who was better than an average sorcerer, but nowhere near hero material, and accused him of offering no real cooperation. Yard excused himself calmly, telling Ferris he was heading out, while privately deciding there was only one thing left for him to do. Later, alone with Ferris, he admitted he wanted revenge on Margaret for her words and needed useful information from her sister's household to make it happen. Ferris tried to calm him, but Yard drew her close instead, reflecting that royalty answering to no supreme authority was something he found unforgivable. He decided against using his usual brainwashing methods on Margaret, reasoning it would ruin her royal character and interfere with his long-term plans. Instead, he learned that Sophia, Margaret's sister, had expressed fondness and respect for him, and that she stood a lower chance of inheriting the throne despite her own battle experience. That night, he told Ferris to use sweet words on his behalf, wondering aloud how to win Sophia over without resorting to brainwashing since she was still royalty. Watching the moon from her balcony, Margaret admitted to herself that she might add a few tricks of her own to the situation. The next day, Sophia apologized to Yard for her sister's harsh behavior during the meeting, insisting it was still her duty as royalty to support the hero's efforts. As they walked together before his coming mission, Yard confessed that from the very moment he saw her through the summoning light, he had wanted an opportunity to express his feelings. Taking her hand, he declared his love and his wish to remain by her side forever. Flustered, Sophia protested that they had only just met and that she was a princess, yet admitted something warm was spreading through her chest. Sophia worried aloud that they needed to act properly and secure blessings for their engagement, fearing they couldn't cross that line given the risks involved. As they reached her door, his magic worked quietly beneath the surface, overproducing the pleasure centers of her mind. Trembling, Sophia gave a shaky thumbs up, telling herself she would take her time and appreciate what was happening to her. Grateful and flustered, she thanked him for everything, admitting that after their earlier argument she had gone to talk to Margaret and gotten the chance to understand her sister better. Margaret rounded on Yard immediately, demanding to know what kind of witchcraft he had used on her sister. He brushed it off, suggesting they simply clarify things calmly. Margaret coldly told him she no longer cared, letting Ferris handle him instead. But when Ferris snapped at Margaret for insulting her master, Sophia stepped in too, declaring she would not tolerate anyone speaking against Yard's sister or not. As preparations began for the hero's next expedition to the battlefield, Ferris pleaded for someone to look after Marie during the mission.
Yard sat without speaking, his expression stiff as tension filled the minor cabin. The additional people gazed equally uncomfortable. One rubbed his face in frustration whereas another forced a nervous grin. Abruptly, a young woman let out an extended, exaggerated yawn, breaking the silence. The awkward atmosphere exploded. Yard clenched his face whereas the young woman recoiled in embarrassment. Beyond, an individual on horseback sighed. The journey had barely started, and it was previously unbearable. Confused glances were exchanged as the girl's conduct shifted without explanation. Yard acknowledged he had no clue what made the change. Without alarm, she launched into unusual, exaggerated movements, stunning the additional people. Seizing the moment, Ferris suggested they discuss magic to ease the tension and shift focus. Her explanations centered nearby belief, emotion, and passion, believing spiritual strength came from the chest. In opposition, Yard described magic as systematic and precise, a science that produced identical results for all. Yard displayed a healing technique using the body's own regenerative capacity. Ferris, shocked by the concept, struggled to accept that a person beyond the clergy could use healing magic without incantations. Misunderstanding his logic completely, she concluded Yard must be a profoundly faithful attendant of God, glowing with admiration. Elsewhere, Yard clarified his strategy about the command bracelets, revealing he was never readily fooled. The bracelet, enchanted to subdue the wearer, had deceived even Sagami. As the carriage shifted along the countryside, Yard thought on the burdens he now bore. Arriving at Nickeltown, he wandered the streets, seeking anything to break the monotony. His hopes for a tavern weakened rapidly. In a grim alley, two thugs harassed a frightened young woman, ignoring her pleas for aid. Yard confronted them quietly. The young woman pleaded for rescue, as the males chuckled arrogantly. Without delay, Yard hit. One attacker collapsed immediately, staggered by Yard's swift, savage magic. The second thug drew his blade, stunned at the swift loss of his partner. A mighty spell hit the attacker squarely, hurling him through the air prior to he collapsed. Shocked by the display, observed as the street cleared, realizing how readily Yard overpowered them. Grateful, she introduced personally as Mira and offered to repay him by inviting him home. Instead, Yard rejected the offer and reached to collect his reward in a bold, unexpected way. Yard activates a sound isolating barrier, cutting off the surroundings. The space becomes sealed, and escape routes vanish. The young woman stumbles back, startled by the abrupt shift. Dread replaces uncertainty as she realizes the barrier prevents beyond interference. Yard advances, exerting coercion through immense magical aura. She is compelled into submission by circumstance instead of energy. The scene ends without resolution, making merely silence, tension. Werner engages in a tense encounter where command and opposition clash, testing his spirit. The aftermath reveals additional people involved, their satisfaction hinting at a scheme that unfolded as intended. Werner reflects on the evening, unmoved by the reward. He seeks solitude, preferring escape through drink. An enraged tone cries out his name, tension rising. Confronted for breaking protocol, Werner faces reprimand, as frustration boils over between them. Yard sat idly in the carriage, bored by the lack of demon attacks during the second day of the expedition. A female warrior scolded him, reminding him they were beyond the safe zone and should remain alert. Regardless of her concerns, Yard assuredly assured that he'd handle any dangers. He considered researching magic but lacked cooperative subjects in this unfamiliar world. Angered, Yard lamented the absence of suitable test subjects, limiting his experiments. Whereas watching over the path, the troops discussed the difficulty of considering reliable test subjects for magical experiments. Abruptly, the sound of deep growling pierced the air, indicating peril nearby. Panic burst out as one trooper cried, alerting the others to an ambush. Disorder continued when one of their own collapsed, injured during the abrupt strike. Surrounded by terrifying beasts, the unit understood the demon army had arrived in full energy. Ferris rushed to aid the wounded, invoking holy aid as her healing magic started. Although initially slow, her spell surged with power, stunning the troops with its abrupt effectiveness. Encouraged by her success, the champions readied for combat, eager to prove themselves against the approaching menace. Resolutely they rallied together and announced the start of their initial fight. Spears were lifted as the front line fought fiercely with the demon forces. The champion called forth his spiritual blade, declaring his resolve to combat with justice. He released a fierce attack on the demon horde, supported by gunfire from his ally. Without delay, the muscular fighter hurled grenades, engulfing the enemies in explosions. Triumph seemed certain, but one individual warned it wasn't over yet. To their shock, the demons remained unharmed, their strength plainly underestimated. The terrifying demons roared and charged forward, immense the front line with relentless energy. Yard quietly readied himself, drawing his blade inside an arcane ring as if waiting for the right moment. Watching the fight, one fighter acknowledged their martial potential, but sensed they were nearing their limits. Regardless of their efforts, the demons remained unshaken. At last ready, announced his technique complete, and requested the enemies be brought to him, confident in his power to end the battle. Hovering in a glowing circle, Yard triggered his fourth special technique and called the foe forward. With immense energy, he released the devastating disintegration strike, obliterating his target in a single blast. The monster's form melted into nothing, reduced to bones under the torrent of arcane strength. Close-by allies stood in shock, awed by the vast intensity of the assault. Witnesses praised Yard's power, acknowledging his immense magical prowess. Yard, carrying a demon corpse, modestly credited the others for repelling the foe, asserting he only finished the job. The major, embarrassed yet grateful, thanked him, whereas awkwardly expressing disapproval of his connection to her sister. Curious, she inquired about the corpse, merely to learn he intended to dissect it for magical study. With requirements, she allowed it, seeking privacy and shared findings. Yard agreed to, pleased by the timely arrival of his test subjects. A discussion emerged about the unusual features of a fresh specimen: brown skin, pointed ears, and unknown origins. The elf young woman lay motionless, her form displayed as the subject of magical study. Though hesitant to start with a non-human, Yard found the situation acceptable for his initial experiment. He triggered a special recovery technique, intent on reviving the corpse for testing. With resurrection complete, the young woman stirred, indicating the beginning of Yard's following phase.
The elf girl slowly awakened in a woods, her form weak and her thoughts blurred. She fought to understand where she was. Lasting up, she understood she was previously revived. An individual welcomed her and other resurrected wizards into a distant realm. Stunned and enraged, she requested answers, still bound by ropes and unsure of her fate. The man used energy against close-by guards to assert command. He remained collected, unfazed by their reaction. With a sharp glare beneath his mask, Yard lifted his wand, indicating the end of negotiations. Behind him, the elf young woman recoiled in panic as he drew nearer without delay. Dread consumed her completely, her face contorted in horror as she understood the peril. Displaying a preserved brain, Yard coldly clarified the reason for fresh samples in his experiments. On her knees, she pleaded desperately for mercy as Yard closed the distance with eerie calm. Desperation overtook the elf young woman as she pleaded for her life, bringing anything in exchange for mercy. Kneeling low, she awaited his response, whereas Yard considered her proposal without speaking. With a collected tone, Yard softly lifted her face and inquired her name. She replied nervously, identifying personally as Elmer. He offered her a chance, seeking assistance in a mysterious test he intended to conduct. As Yard proceeded forward, he warned her that survival depended on proving her usefulness. Yard clarified the experiment would require strict requirements and inquired if Elmer could endure them. Determined to prove personally, she cast an incantation, forming a floating sphere of bathwater. Following witnessing the result, Elmer silently asked about whether her race gave her an advantage in magic. Yard acknowledged her talent but pointed out her current state limited her access to greater strength. Without delay, he proposed rebuilding her brain to unlock potential from another world. Elmer tried to escape, frightened by Yard's abrupt move, confused by his shifting motives. He assured her survival, showing a mark that would keep her alive regardless of injuries. As he restrained her, dread overtook her expression, uncertain of what was coming following. Yard started the procedure, ignoring her screams as the pain staggered her completely. Once finished, he noted the success, although belatedly acknowledged he should have blocked her pain receptors. Following the ordeal, Yard paused the test, watching Elmer's reaction to her altered condition. A massive sphere of bathwater formed above her, proving the procedure had produced results, although instability remained. Exhaustion continued as Yard supported her weakened form, acknowledging the strain placed on her thoughts. He evaluated her performance, recognizing her effort, and confirming his promise to keep her alive. Later, inside the camp, Yard instructed her to abandon her past whereas remaining under his command. Following the assault, troops praised a sorcerer named Samagi for rebuilding the camp with magic. Elsewhere, Yard faced criticism for reviving a shadow elf and taking her as his apprentice. Regardless of protests, he defended his decision, insisting on treating all women kindly. Elmer, shaken but sincere, clarified her amnesia and gained Yard's faith through vulnerability. In the end, Ferris reluctantly approved her aura, allowing her to join under strict supervision. Concerns rose over Elmer's aura, with others alarmed Yard that bringing a shadow elf to the capital would spark controversy. Unbothered, Yard reaffirmed his decision. As her mentor, he vowed to take full responsibility for her. Inside the camp, troops whispered cruel assumptions as Elmer strode by. She asked about Yard's motives, uncertain of her past, whereas he promised to protect her as his student. Showing his true faith, Yard acknowledged he trusted races like hers more. Yard inquired for Elmer's assistance, and she agreed to without delay. He named her El, and properly made her his apprentice, setting expectations. Elmer smiled with honesty, expressing her eagerness to assist under him. Although embarrassed, she vowed to do her best, whereas Yard viewed her as a tool for experimentation.
Yard considered exploring the fortress, but unease lingered in the air. Behind a closed entrance, a frightened shadow elf young woman huddled on the ground, refusing to move. She trembled, admitting to Yard that ever since they arrived, dread hadn't left her. Beyond, troops muttered with suspicion and resentment, their stares sharp and accusing. Regardless of her anxiety, Yard reassured her. They required merely patience until the misunderstanding passed. Yard arranged for a shared chamber and even cast a protective barrier to ensure her safety. The young woman, touched by his care, gripped back tears as she promised to focus on magic. Encouraged by his belief, she remained with resolve, ready to start her training. He scheduled private lessons at evening, pressing her to rest for the task ahead. Elsewhere, the commanders assembled, preparing for a faux offensive expected before winter's arrival. As the fortress settled into silence, the additional people drifted into sleep, not knowing of what was unfolding. Under the moonbright night, Yard started the night's lecture, explaining magic classifications to his eager apprentice. She listened intently, discovering how advanced methods could function without movement or incantation. Intricate spells, he warned, required processing far beyond a normal mind's capacity. To illustrate his point, Yard released a fourth-class combat spell, its power illuminating the night. A black hole burst out at Yard's command, swallowing part of the peak and shocking his apprentice. Staring in astonishment, she pointed at the vanished peak, staggered by the spell's destructive strength. He dismissed the scene as a basic range technique, assuring her it could be reversed. She nervously inquired if she'd be discovering that, and Yard promised they'd be beginning from the basics. Afterward, she cast her own incantation, freezing her target with newfound confidence. Following a successful incantation, the elf young woman beamed with pride and eagerly shared her joy with Yard. As the evening grew silent, he suggested returning to rest, and she continued cheerfully. Yard reminded her that nightly training would now become routine and requested full commitment. Nevertheless, she abruptly embraced him from behind, catching him off guard. Driven by gratitude, she offered personally mentally, misunderstanding how to repay his kindness. Yard realized the elf girl's abrupt shift in conduct stemmed from her deepening emotions toward him. Attempting to respond without encouraging uncertainty, he restrained her with a controlled magical technique. She reacted in astonishment, staggered by the unfamiliar sensations made by the magic. Even whereas embarrassed, she admitted her admiration, but Yard maintained his composure. With firm words, he clarified his intent, to raise her solely as a capable sorcerer. The sorcerer fought as arcane tendrils bound her, reacting violently to her aura. Her handler observed, unfazed, monitoring the magical reaction without interference. He observed with interest, concluding how best to proceed, intrigued by her unique responses to containment. An urgent summons interrupted, calling him to a crisis. A peak had vanished, his oversight now requested consequences. Tia served both as a servant and secret agent, maintaining her control regardless of her lord's absence. The newcomer Rosalie, a noble's daughter, resented her lowly chores and envied Tia's trusted standing. Jealousy rose as Rosalie mocked Tia, bitter that fortune favored a person so common in her gaze. Gossip surrounded Tia, who was linked to the champion loved by the princess, raising suspicion. Elsewhere, Sophia lay bedridden, love-struck and depressed, whereas Tia remained connected to her lord through magic. Tia fought to focus, distracted by the force of her magical communication duties. The enchanted stone she used proved immense, triggering reactions she couldn't predict. Although she believed she'd adapted, an abrupt wave caught her off guard mid-task. She tried to conceal her condition, blaming awkward movements and shifting blame to clumsiness. Even in an empty chamber she panicked, fearing Rosalie might discover her state. Tia clenched her resolve, determined to endure and exit the chamber with control. Regardless of her efforts, her form betrayed her as she fought to stay upright. Abrupt outburst overtook her, exposing everything exactly when Rosalie arrived surprisingly. Disorder continued, with Rosalie erupting in fury at the soaked ground and spectacle. Quiet and burning with shame, Tia swore vengeance whereas trying to collect personally. Following a teasing exchange, Tia fought to maintain control under her lord's playful scrutiny. Shifting into duty, she assembled herself and started reporting newly uncovered information. The evening prior to, she had infiltrated the Duke's hall and found incriminating evidence. Her discovery disclosed plans to invade Gerda, using enslaving implements to disable opposition. Worse yet, a terrifying secret weapon was being readied to crush the kingdom's army. Although he lacked the strength to prevent the menace, her report intrigued him instead of discouraged. With a calm yet provocative tone, he admitted he desired merely to be with Tia upon returning. He declined another woman's advances, asserting devotion while casually watching her desperate reaction. An explanation continued. The elves reacted to powerful magical presence, valuing it beyond physical power. He speculated it was easy to command them under such control. The elf young woman remained isolated in the corner, staggered by despair and unable to move. To aid her recover, she was brought to the bath, where a gentle saint offered comfort. As the two bathed, they spoke of the Lord, admiring his kindness and magical power. Yet doubts lingered, as the elf feared his motives were merely physical, regardless of reassurances. Although she insisted he not once touched her, evidence suggested deeper encounters with additional people had occurred. The saint panicked, believing she might be his following target, but decided to resist temptation. Weary from non-stop duties, the female leader left her office to catch her breath. 10 days had passed at Gerda Fortress, with no break in the hectic routine. Even a basic task became a challenge. Elsewhere, the champion Alec dominated the practice grounds, defeating opponents with ease. His power rallied the troops. Assistance arrived from healers and tacticians, their aura boosting morale and efficiency. Another leader, Sagami, secretly built a veteran unit. Their initial assignment had previously begun. Although tired, Margaret reminded personally of her duty as leader, refusing to show weakness. Yard approached her surprisingly, causing frustration, although his presence hinted at deeper worry. Margaret asked about his motives, only to learn he simply wished to tease her out of boredom. She reminded him of the reconstruction task, which Yard claimed to have completed readily. With magic, Yard effortlessly rebuilt the structure, impressing all present with his ridiculous strength. Margaret reminded Yard she had no time for games, burdened by mounting responsibilities. Yard offered aid, asserting a magical massage could ease her fatigue. Although slightly embarrassed, Margaret steadily declined, dismissing his approach as excessive and unnecessary. He countered with worry, alarmed that her collapse would endanger not just the fortress, but the entire realm. Understanding the facts in his words, she hesitantly consented to follow him somewhere more private. Margaret hesitantly asked about the reason to undress for the treatment Yard insisted was crucial for her leadership. Although plainly uncomfortable, she complied, urging him to proceed rapidly. Yard started channeling energy through his palms. As the magical therapy started, Margaret found the experience much further intense and intimate than she anticipated. Her form reacted instinctively, tense from prolonged stress and heavy responsibility. Yard reminded her of her duty, pressing her to endure for the sake of the realm. Within the silent chamber, Margaret sat stiffly, trying to suppress her discomfort. Although she masked it with pride, the fatigue lingered deep in her form. Yard neared quietly, bringing focus instead of flirtation. His touch, guided by magic, stirred an unusual warmth, half soothing, half unsettling. Regardless of her initial opposition, she started to understand his motives weren't just playful. Beneath his aloof demeanor, there was genuine respect. For the initial time, she allowed personally to faith him. Margaret, second princess, underwent a delicate magical treatment that tested her stamina. The magician, certain in his method, announced the completion of the procedure. Weary but satisfied, Margaret was offered reassurance. The healer voiced readiness to help anew should the effects wear off. The following morning, the fortress resumed routine. Margaret rejoined discussions regarding diplomatic matters and infrastructure updates. Displaying calm control, Margaret credited her recovery to Yard magic. Margaret silently thought on the treatment, uncertain how to explain its effects. Trying to hide her reaction, she hastily dismissed any private emotions, focusing instead on her duties. At that moment, a trooper arrived with an urgent report. Margaret fought to compose personally as she allowed the individual in. A looming invasion threatened Gerda. The details, from routes to troop power, were meticulously recorded. Learning that cursed beasts would lead the assault, Margaret's worry increased. The trooper reported fresh peril, signs of red scales confirmed. Margaret stiffened, recognizing the serious implication.
A crimson-scaled dragon ruled the northern mountains of the demon realm, feared for its unequaled strength. Within the plan hall, the leaders discussed the beast's authority. Despite the peril, some champions expressed confidence, eager to take on the menace with combined strength. Additional people warned that rushing in was destined to be suicide, as past attacks had proven ineffective against the dragon. With tension rising, all gaze shifted to Yard, hoping he held a viable scheme. Examined the foe quietly, stating that the black wolves were manageable with proper strengthening techniques. Nevertheless, he warned the genuine challenge lay in the dragon. Merely one individual remained a chance against it. That individual was Alec, a warrior whose potential was greater than he understood. Yard disclosed the blade Alec wielded held hidden power, capable of shifting the outcome of fight. Alec, startled but encouraged, agreed to his role, believing in the spirit-blessed blade he had long trusted. As morale lifted, the team praised Alec's potential, seeing new hope against the dragon menace. One warrior inquired Yard about unlocking concealed strength. Yard replied assuredly, needing only one evening to prepare. Elsewhere, Elle admired Yard's power, convinced that even the Crimson Scales was no match for his magic. Clinging to him more often, Elle's gestures suggested a quiet assistance and growing attachment. Slightly embarrassed, acknowledged her progress, although he reminded her he wasn't the one to combat. Yard chose to remain in an assistance role, not wishing to draw too much focus following past overuse of magic. Whereas Alec marveled at the sword's hidden peril, Yard assured him that brute techniques weren't essential. Analyzing its structure, Yard found its intricate nature suitable for enhancing Alec's heroic transformation. Elle, watching silently, identified the sword's activation method and praised Alec's recent study. Eager to grow, she vowed to assist Yard with her own magic on the combat field. On the day of the fight meeting, soldiers assembled as the last strategy review concluded under tense silence. Alec shifted ahead to speak, sensing the dread in the crowd. Yard observed quietly, expecting this moment. Addressing the army, Alec announced the demon realm's menace real, but urged them not to dread. With blade lifted, he vowed to defeat the dragon and lead them to triumph. The crowd burst out in roaring applause, their morale at last ignited by his determination. Roused by Alec's speech, the troops shouted in unison, their will to combat at last awakened. News of the enemy's advance reached the fortress. The commanders rapidly rallied the troops to gesture. With no hesitation, the order to intercept was given, and all present shifted rapidly to formation. Despite knowing they were outnumbered tenfold, the defending forces gripped firm under mounting coercion. Yard observed the enemy's beasts approaching and quietly readied his next spell, unfazed by their numbers. Foe mages released a mighty barrier, silencing allied spells with a magic jammer. A sinister tone challenged the heroes, mocking them as the true fight started. Empowered by Yard's magic, a warrior tore through beasts with ease, noting the drastic gap in power. Surrounded by massive beasts, he remained his ground, fearless and unwavering in the face of peril. Elsewhere, Ferris organized the wounded, preparing an extensive healing ceremony to save lives rapidly. Ferris assembled her power and cast an extensive healing spell, restoring the wounded throughout the combat field. The tide started to turn. Regardless of being outnumbered, the champions remained firm with renewed vigor. Abruptly, an urgent report arrived. A fresh aura had arrived the skies. The Crimson Scales had at last appeared, casting a shadow over the combat field.
A massive dragon emerged into the night, bringing the defensive fight to its peak. The troops observed in wonder, frozen by the creature's scale and aura. Alex shifted ahead, commanding the troops to retreat. He claimed the champions would expression the crimson-scaled menace. Doubt crept in as Alec hesitated. He couldn't guarantee triumph. Regardless of uncertainty, the individual in black readied for action, determined to try. Analyzing the magic flow, he plotted his following move. Yard tampered with the dragon's command, amused by the disorder its rampage could unleash. The beast's conduct rose erratic. With a deafening roar, the crimson scales stormed forward, scattering troops in its path. Panic burst out throughout the combat field. Creature's mind succumbed too readily. Magic opposition in this world was astonishingly frail. The foe commander, staggered, understood their plan to use the dragon had collapsed. He observed in terror, questioning how everything had gone so wrong. Alec understood the enemy's failure to command the dragon gave them a rare combat edge. Yard quietly confirmed the circumstances. The crimson scales thrashed wildly. Yard warned that inaction would doom the realm. Regardless of his reluctance, Alec was informed he alone had the power to confront the beast. Surprisingly, his armament started to glow, reacting to his resolve. Empowered by faith, Alec agreed to the burden. Yard, amused, let him go forward. Alec launched forward, pouring his spirit into a last assault. Yard observed, amused by the hero's dramatic determination. Prior to the towering beast, Alec shone brightly, although to the dragon he was barely a menace. Unfazed, he released an advanced combat technique, aiming directly at the creature's core. His blade activated a devastating energy beam, cutting throughout the combat field. The laser pierced the air, stripping magical opposition, with strength spanning thousands of kilometers. Laser strike tore through the beast's core, engulfing it in a devastating explosion. Alec lifted his tone to rally the kingdom's soldiers, his blade held high as a beacon. With the crimson scales defeated, he called them to advance, marking a turning point in the battle. Morale wave was immediate. News of the dragon's demise swept through the combat field, transforming the tide into an one-sided attack. The fight of Gluta ended in triumph, with foe lines shattered. Mugs fought together in celebration. The troops cheered for their triumph and honored the newly titled Dragon Slayer. Alec basked in the praise of his comrades. Elsewhere, laughter and drinks flowed. The rest of the team praised freely, not knowing of Yard's absence from the center. Keeping his distance, Yard observed from the shadows. A shadow elf young woman silently neared him, asking if she was a burden. Yard dismissed her concerns with dry wit, calling her an useful deterrent. Although Yard stayed out of the attention, others identified his role. She accused him of downplaying his contribution. Yard, ever the realist, reminded her that the battle wasn't over. Then, without alarm, he made a bold move, catching her off guard with unwelcome closeness under the guise of familiarity. Embarrassed and irritated, she scolded him whereas Yard stayed collected, unaffected by her reaction. Afterward that evening, under the silent moon, the realm wished its heroes to return home rapidly. The young woman observed the absence of her usual telepathic contact and assumed her lord was occupied. A knock interrupted the calm. She opened the entrance, confused by the visitor's courteous tone. Prior to reacting, masked males seized her. Gagged and restrained, she detected they were taking her to the marquee. The champions return in glory, greeted by cheering citizens. Alec waves proudly, basking in praise, whereas Ferris smiles serenely beside him. Before the palace court, the king praises the heroes' achievements, declaring their efforts as a major triumph for the kingdom. Their deeds spirit age shape the nation's future. As recognition, titles are bestowed. Alec is granted the rank of baron, whereas Yard Werner and Sagami Ryohei are honored with baronetcy. Ferris is offered a key position as the Eastern Collaborative Cleric by the kingdom's church. The champions accept their positions, vowing devotion and strength against the demon realm. Yard remained poised as applause surrounded him. Although unsure of the title's worth, he agreed to the king's gesture without opposition. From throughout the hall, Duke Dian glared at Yard with force. Observers observed the shift in mood as the ceremony concluded. Walking through the castle corridor, Yard thought on the could-not plot involving the slave bracelets. He identified the duke's suspicion but sensed no menace. Soon following, Sophia greeted him with joy and praise. Her relief was genuine, and she invited him for tea. Instead of accepting, Yard softly declined, citing more pressing matters and implying they see another time. Sophia agreed to Yard's rejection with silent understanding, though her disappointment lingered behind a gentle grin. Afterward, Yard strode with purpose, pleased that he had maneuvered additional people to obvious his path. His mind drifted toward further private desires. Within his property, a new maid named Rosalie introduced herself assuredly, stating she was destined to be his exclusive servant from now on. Curious, Yard asked about the abrupt change in staff. Rosalie dismissed the inquiry with a vague grin, asserting ignorance of her predecessor's fate. Instead of elaborate, she insisted he focus on the future, now that he gripped an honorable title. Rosalie stiffened in shock upon recognizing an expression. Her expression turned against disbelief, certain the young woman she noticed shouldn't be alive. In a grim corridor, two males casually discussed the fate of a young woman recently acquired, hinting at her grim circumstances. Through magical communication, Yard reached Tia, who confirmed her location in a dungeon near the castle, her tone frail but steady. Tia disclosed her capture after the kingdom's triumph, and admitted she was previously punished, likely to erase any trace of her assignment. Guilt weighed on Yard. He apologized for his oversight and promised to rescue her immediately, determined to correct his mistake. Though Tia couldn't describe her location due to being blindfolded, Yard assured her it wasn't essential he had previously found her. Attracting an arcane circle, he triggered a mighty spell. The space distorted as he cast the Type 4 space leap technique. In a flash, Tia was teleported directly into his arms. Relieved and startled, she lifted her gaze at him with gratitude. Yard embraced her softly, vowing revenge on Duke Dian for laying a hand on what belonged to him. Promising to mend her wounds, Yard gripped Tia close, his fury concealed behind a calm, determined expression. Yard neared Rosalie, who remained seated and not knowing. He reached toward her as she at last stirred from her unexpected slumber. Confronted by both Yard and Tia, Rosalie appeared shaken. Tia criticized her lack of decorum, whereas Yard's gaze remained unreadable. Abruptly, Rosalie's control broke. Unusual reactions staggered her, making her confused and physically unsettled by unfamiliar sensations. Tia coldly clarified that this response was deliberate, a corrective method designed to humble arrogance and disobedience. With the facts disclosed, Rosalie fought to process her condition. The atmosphere shifted heavy as she understood she was previously altered whereas asleep. The young magician is restrained in a confined chamber, placed under strict supervision by a senior form. His opposition is immediate, but his standing leaves little chamber to escape. Coercion increases as his reactions are closely observed. His control falters, showing vulnerability as the test shifts from physical restraint to mind strain. Regardless of his refusal to submit, the examination continues. The senior quietly evaluates his limits, treating his discomfort as part of the process. An offer of reward and duty is presented, tying his stamina to larger expectations beyond himself. The ordeal determines under watchful gaze, making him shaken yet aware that this trial is only the beginning. Found themselves staggered, detected in an unfamiliar confrontation that stripped them of control. Their form reacted instinctively, unable to resist the forceful rhythm imposed on them. A dominant aura loomed closer, unrelenting and precise. The tension rose as commands slipped further away, and the lesson being imparted was physical, intense and commanding. Following the ordeal, the form knelt silently, awaiting judgment. Approval was given, performance acknowledged with cold satisfaction. Their superior observed with calm detachment, noting both the mental aftermath and concealed desires that surfaced during the encounter. An object was recovered, a symbol of previous failure, now strengthened. The strategist observed the board, recognizing Duke Dian's standing had grown desperate. Every move pointed toward an inevitable fall. Tia, weighed by regret, asked about her own weakness. Despite her domestic turmoil, she quietly vowed to endure whatever judgment continued. Throughout the combat field, a fresh opponent emerged. Rosalie is thrown aside by her lord, who not anymore sees any value in her. Her pleas are ignored as he coldly casts her out. With Rosalie gone, another young woman walks the hallway, knowing the obstacle has been took off. A sinister grin follows her escape. Yard, the black-haired magician, silently leaves the wide range, deep and considered, unnoticed by those scheming behind closed doors. Within, the young woman questions whether releasing Rosalie was a mistake, fearing exposure to the Duke. As Yard's control looms, her lord tightens command, exploiting her weakness named L for his advantage. L cautiously carries out her position, setting a trap under the guise of intimacy. Her mind remained focused. When the moment is right, she plans to seize command. Yard continues to toy with her, not knowing of the genuine depth of her intent. Although their interaction appears mutual, there's a concealed layer of control beneath her reactions. He offers her a reward, reinforcing the illusion of devotion between lord and attendant. Beneath the surface, conflicting emotions swirl: devotion, dread, and calculation. Regardless of his past experiences, Yard finds something unique in L. Her reactions stir something he hasn't sensed from additional people, clouding his judgment further. Beyond, the calm exterior of the property contrasts the inner disorder. A decision has been made, the one named Dian. The servant hesitates, but rapidly composes personally as Yard questions her readiness. The moment demands full commitment, and he expects no fewer. Rejoined by another attendant, Yard sets out assuredly. Their goal is obvious: confront a mighty form by securing an ally with greater influence. As they approach their destination, Yard reveals he intends to seek a person above the Duke. Recognition dawns: merely one individual fits that description. They are welcomed into a refined chamber. A collected lady awaits, the weight of her aura immediate and undeniable. Seated throughout from her, Yard masks his intent beneath courteous gestures. A basic tea meeting carries the weight of a strategic shift. Yard offers his apology for the abrupt visit, but the lady receives him warmly, plainly pleased by his presence. Curious about the servant accompanying him, she suspects a deeper purpose. Yard confirms the woman's involvement with a silent nod. He reveals the maid's identity, Tia, once aligned with the former champions and now a fugitive pursued by Duke Dian. He requests protection for her. Disturbed, the noblewoman listens as Yard explains Dian's secret dealings with the demon realm and his betrayal of the kingdom's champions. Although Dian appears honorable in crowd, they suspect a concealed agenda. Yard's ally recognizes the menace, a skilled politician who may be guiding the realm into peril. Yard explains the gravity of the circumstances. Armed with testimony and proof, his scheme hinges on the cooperation of a mighty form, and the trap he's preparing must be flawless. The noblewoman expresses her faith in Yard, but insists on confirming something initial, her expression calm yet determined. Approaching Tia, she warns her of the risks Yard is taking. His actions, although bold, leave him vulnerable, and Tia's position is now critical. With force, she demands a promise. Tia must not once mislead or turn against Yard, no matter what lies ahead. Without delay, Tia gives her answer. From a distance, Yard watches the exchange, aware that faith is now his greatest armament. Tia affirms her devotion without delay. Her tone is obvious. She will not deceive Yard, even if it costs her life. Noticing her conviction, Sophia softens. Faith now bridges the gap between them. With their motives aligned, Sophia pledges her assistance. Together they vow to help Yard in the trials ahead. Abruptly, Sophia changes the mood, moving closer to Tia with intense interest, interrupting their so-called strategic meeting. Attracting near, she sniffs Tia's chest and exclaims she can smell Yard on her. The chamber shifts from serious to awkward as Yard winces from afar. Sophia misinterprets the circumstances and confronts the pair, suspecting something inappropriate has happened. Both Yard and Tia are taken by astonishment. Rapidly, Tia clarifies the misunderstanding, explaining how she borrowed Yard's robe following being rescued. Sophia accepts the excuse, slightly embarrassed. The tension dissolves. Apologies are exchanged, and Sophia offers further tea. Yard quietly shifts the topic back to the assignment at hand. With their scheme back on track, they enjoy a brief moment of peace. Although amused, Yard reflects on how unpredictable his companions can be. Sophia, analyzing Tia anew, notes her unexpected sharpness and grace. Beneath her maid appearance lies power befitting a person of honorable presence. Yard's casual remark surprisingly flusters Sophia, catching her off guard. She brushes it off, hiding her embarrassment behind a collected grin. Trying to steer the conversation back, she reminds Yard of their ongoing collaboration. With the circumstances under command, she signals it's time to move forward. Afterward, as Yard walks alone at evening, he considers updating Elle, but prior to he can gesture, a person calls out to him in haste. Ferris arrives breathless with troubling news. Elamare has been detained under suspicion of being a spy for the demon realm. Recognizing Duke Dian's ploy, Yard realizes the foe acted faster than expected. Without delay, he sets off to correct the misunderstanding. Yard reassures his ally, asserting everything proceeds as Elle intended. He begins telepathic coordination whereas uncertainty brews close by. Elle, now restrained, had deliberately allowed personally to be captured as part of a greater plan. Surrounded by troops, she faces Duke Dian's forces. Her gesture of courage demands immediate assistance from those who understand her genuine position.
In the grand courtroom, the trial of champion Yard Werner was properly announced. The royal buzzed with tension as guards remained readied. Yard remained prior to the throne, his palms restrained. Whispers spread through the hall, questioning why a praised champion was on trial. Duke Dian announced the accusations, calling it an unforgivable sin. Even the monarch appeared confused by the abrupt charges. Was accused of treason, leaking information to the Daro demon realm. Understanding the plot, he understood the Duke intended to make him a scapegoat. Remaining collected, Yard denied the charges. He announced the claims untrue, calling the Duke's words a fabrication. Yard's blunt tone made an uproar, but he quietly pointed out the flaws in the translation magic, sparking frustration from the accuser. A cleric clarified that their translation tool lacked the nuance to capture respectful language from Yard's original world. Defending himself, Yard clarified that as a person newly called, he lacked access to any critical secrets that could be leaked. The monarch acknowledged the logic, but the accuser scoffed and announced they possessed proof of Yard's betrayal. Duke Dian commanded an attendant to present the so-called evidence, leading a restrained lady into the hall. Restrained shadow elf lady was presented as evidence, but Yard immediately observed she wasn't harmed. The accuser claimed Elle was a magician from the demon realm and part of an assault on a noble's carriage, labeling her a menace to the realm. Observers reacted with disbelief as the accuser emphasized Yard's choice to take in the foe as his apprentice instead of executing her. Whereas Yard refuted the claims, another official interrupted, implying there was further evidence, prompting Yard to accuse them of fabricating lies. A trooper gave over an item allegedly found in Yard's belongings. A court magician affirmed it was suspicious, reinforcing the narrative being built against him. The courtroom burst out when Duke Dian presented a ring-like object, declaring it to be a banned slave bracelet. Yard quietly asked about the court magician, asking if he had examined the domestic enchantments thoroughly instead of relying only on the visible engravings. Under coercion, the magician admitted that he didn't fully understand all the magical equations etched into the item, though it resembled known slave artifacts. Without delay, Yard admitted to modifying the bracelet himself. He clarified that it not anymore bound anyone. To assistance Yard's claim, one of the called champions testified. He disclosed that similar bracelets was previously distributed among the champions as protective gear during the campaign. Yard clarified that upon sensing the bracelet's hidden peril, he had rapidly altered them to safeguard the heroes, admitting his silence might have caused confusion. The court murmured in astonishment, questioning if there was truly a traitor among them. Regardless of missing evidence, worry started to rise. Prior to the discussion could end, Duke Dian interrupted, insisting he had one last piece of proof and presented a sealed note to the court. The decrypted message allegedly described combat secrets and bore Yard's handwriting. It was previously found concealed by the Shadow Elf, and the accuser pressed that Yard had no escape left. Nevertheless, Yard's expression shifted. With a grim chuckle, he asked about the Duke's claim of decrypting the note. Yard shattered the forged note with a burst of magic, denouncing the fabricated story as ridiculous. Assuredly, he offered to recount the facts from the beginning. Responding to Yard's command, Elle remained and disclosed that she was coerced into writing the note. She insisted Yard was innocent and had protected her. The monarch tried to downplay her words, citing amnesia and her inability to speak anything but Elvish. Yard clarified she had learned his world's language, and the note was simply written using his homeland's script, not a coded message. To prove it, he triggered the spell embedded in the note, releasing its true magical effect, stunning all present. A magical projection burst out from the enchanted paper, revealing a vivid memory Elle surrounded by muscular men as she wrote at a desk under coercion. The men's endangering voices echoed demanding she not delay, reminding her the Duke was waiting. Her dread was evident. King observed in shock as Yard clarified the magic was designed to record events from the user's surroundings, bringing undeniable evidence. Elsewhere, the memory revealed Duke Dian gloating in secret, convinced that Yard's downfall was guaranteed. His sinister grin sealed the moment. "Just you wait, Yard Werner," he had whispered with murderous intent. The chamber collapsed quiet as the magical projection ended. Gasps echoed. The proof had allowed no space for doubt. Duke Dian's expression twisted in panic. Stammering, he claimed the footage was fabricated and insisted a person was conspiring against him. Unmoved, the monarch called him by name and accused him of framing a champion who had faithfully served the realm. He sternly warned Dian that such a betrayal amounted to treason, a crime punishable by the kingdom's highest laws. Dian desperately cried his motives were patriotic, but his cries were drowned out. His words were announced unworthy of faith. The monarch properly apologized to Yard and announced that all charges were dropped. Yard, with Elle at his side, agreed to the verdict quietly. Nevertheless, Yard wasn't finished. With a sharp glare, he suggested there was further to reveal, specifically, the deeper motives behind Duke Dian's actions. As disorder burst out anew, the king urged Yard to speak, ignoring the Duke's wild protests. Yard pondered aloud, concluding it was destined to be faster if his collaborators clarified the study themselves. He downplayed his position, crediting his team's work, whereas the desperate Duke pleaded for a pause. A certain lady appeared at the courtroom entrance exactly when the noticing intensified. Her timing seemed deliberate. Her unexpected arrival startled both the king and Yard, attracting everyone's focus to her presence. The lady disclosed herself as Sophia, the kingdom's initial princess. Her graceful entrance shifted the mood with calm authority.
Princess Sophia enters the hall, silencing the murmurs. Her aura, unexpected, unsettles the crowd. A seasoned investigator steps forward. He reveals that he was previously contacted secretly and has since been compiling concealed evidence at major risk. Sophia stands collected, whereas the investigator challenges the chamber. Hints of betrayal surface, and the question of the genuine traitor rises sharply. With steady confidence, Sophia declares the investigation's results. Her words tighten the noose nearby the guilty party, who begins to sweat. The last revelation points to Duke Dian's secret correspondence. His ties to a distant ally are exposed, implying motives rooted in strategic fear. To protect his ally, the Duke devised a risky alternative: stop the champion's summoning altogether, or eliminate the called. Yard listened quietly as this motive was disclosed. During the recent fight, critical steps in the Duke's scheme nearly succeeded. Without Alex's power or Yard's intervention, disaster would have hit. Princess Sophia exposed the full scope of the betrayal. The champions would have fallen into faux palms, and the fortress would have collapsed. Witnesses confirmed the scheme. The princess's speech ignited outrage, her leadership stirring the crowd without the use of magic. A servant shifted ahead. Although initially planted by the Duke, she chose devotion to the kingdom, assembled evidence. The maid modestly agreed to gratitude, insisting she had merely fulfilled her duty. Yard, recognizing her courage, acknowledged the peril she had endured. As fresh details emerged, Princess Sophia thought on past rumors. Everything that had once seemed fragmented now suited into place. Teasing remarks surfaced about Yard's closeness with Sophia. With calm dignity, he confirmed their mutual respect. She praised him as a wise and capable individual. Regardless of the shift in tone, Yard redirected focus. The interrogation could wait, he yet had to confront those responsible for the disorder. Once the Duke's secret messages were exposed, panic continued. Diane, desperate, turned against his companions, triggering a cascade of blame and confessions. The conspirators, once powerful aristocrats, were paraded in chains. No lineage could excuse the crime of treason, their penalty was inevitable death. Rosalie alone succeeded in flea capture. Nevertheless, her freedom came at a price, making her broken and stripped of any hope for normal life. Time passed silently. The castle halls stood in calm silence as the dust of warfare at last started to settle. Elf thought on their triumph. The menace of the demon realm was quelled, and corruption inside the realm was previously purged. With a solemn gaze, the servant affirmed it. The extended battle, once hopeless, had at last come to an end. Seated together, Yard and Princess Sophia exchanged gratitude. Each credited the other for their triumph, their bond clearly increased by shared trials. Sophia offered sincere thanks, her words filled with praise. To her, Yard was hardly merely a strategist, but the savior of their realm. With a teasing grin, Yard remarked on her boldness. He asked about her palace conduct, though his tone carried clear fondness. Sophia leaned closer, melting under his touch. Their kiss drew silent objection from Elle, who fought to watch the unfolding intimacy. As Yard addressed Elle and Tia, they shifted, embarrassed. Sophia clung to his side, hearts in her gaze, unwilling to let go. With calm assurance, Yard thanked Elle and Tia. Their assistance allowed him to move forward without delay. He chose to dedicate time to deeper magical research but admitted the limitations of working inside the castle walls. Prompted by Tia's influence, Yard considered acquiring a residence in the capital. As a baronet, it wouldn't be difficult. Although ownership required honorable approval and palace permission, his reputation made the process unusually fast. Sophia smiled warmly, bringing to speak to her father. Yard, amazed by her initiative, agreed to. Everything seemed to fall into place once further. Sophia admitted her sadness. As a princess, castle duties would limit her visits. Yard reassured her, promising to return often. With honesty, she praised Elle and Tia, acknowledging them as trusted and capable allies worthy of supporting Yard. She encouraged them to help him well in his fresh home. Yard observed silently, bringing a knowing smile. Abruptly, Sophia announced her intentions bravely. She was destined to be Yard's lawful wife. Her announcement sent a shock through the chamber. With an intense aura, she warned Elle and Tia not to overstep. The girls trembled, rapidly nodding in fearful agreement. Yard sighed, staggered by the incidents and mental intensity surrounding him. As evening settled in, the residence quieted. Yard slept soundly whereas Elle lay close by, unable to calm her mind. Memories of Yard's praise lingered in her thoughts. Her emotions grew silently, hidden beneath a soft grin and longing gaze. Following a month in the distant realm, Yard's days of uncertainty come to an end. Led through fortified gates, he follows silently, uncertain what lies ahead. He arrives at his newly granted residence, a great, well-built residence. Yard feels a shift within him. This place would become his base of operations. Within, he is greeted by a servant who warmly introduces personally and speaks of newly recruited staff. Yard senses structure start to form. The maids, Frau and Roni, present themselves with defined roles, ready to assist with devotion and diligence. At last, Kurt, the butler, steps forward, taking charge of finances and diplomacy, completing Yard's household team. Yard observed the elf beside him quietly, showing no signs of prejudice. His calm demeanor reassured the additional people of his neutrality toward grim elves. Whereas some aspects of his fresh life were surprising, Yard took everything in stride, reacting with collected acceptance. He acknowledged Tia's efforts with a rare gesture of approval. Inspecting the interior, Yard noted the spacious layout. The residence provided beyond sufficient rooms, even if additional live-in servants were hired. In the basement, he discovered an unusual hall. Although unsettling, Yard considered its potential use as a laboratory. A carved dragon head spewed hot bath water endlessly. For Yard, this was something he had extended missed since arriving in this world. Together with the additional people, he arrived the bath wide range. The novelty of crowd bathing in this distant land left some of them clearly surprised. Steam rose from the surface as they stepped into the great pool. They hadn't expected something so luxurious, mistaking it at initial for a basic washroom. Settled in, Yard noted the magical construction. It surpassed expectations, having been made from enchanted stone and spirit energy. Relaxing in the warmth, one servant nervously commented on the unfamiliarity. Yard nevertheless found the view and comfort a welcome return to normalcy. Though Yard understood many magical methods, crafting an advanced bathing system had pressed his limits, yet he found the effort worthwhile. Elsewhere, a man neared with an appeal to share knowledge, asserting psychic memory safeguards were in place. Yard responded rapidly to the abrupt menace, repelling the attacker without delay. Troubled, he understood the town harbored more concealed users than expected. At that moment, an awkward interruption drew him back to reality. As the warmth of the bath envelops them, the abrupt closeness creates a charged atmosphere. A moment of unexpected contact leaves the servant embarrassed, her control briefly shaken. Attempting to explain, she mutters an apology. The atmosphere remains awkward but not hostile. Yard speaks quietly, his tone neither teasing nor commanding, but his aura is undeniably assertive. The maid responds with a mix of uncertainty and emotion, trying to keep clarity amid the growing force. Boundaries blur as proximity increases. The elf close by notices the circumstances but chooses not to intervene, plainly uncertain how to react. From beyond the bath, questions are lifted. Yard responds evasively, keeping things vague. The mood settles into an unusual silence. Staggered by an unfamiliar sensation, the girl's form quivered as heat rose to her cheeks. Her breathing rose uneven, detected in a moment of unexpected vulnerability. Close by, another girl leaned forward, preparing to join in regardless of her quiet apprehension. A single glance disclosed her uncertainty, although interest lingered behind her eyes. Without alarm, a hand reached out to help her, though the gesture proved too abrupt. The contact disturbed her control, sending her into a startled retreat as water splashed nearby them. A slip continued, toppling her into the bubbling bath. Legs flailed skyward whereas the impact sent foam flying in every direction. In the silence that continued, the initial girl rested against her partner's chest, their earlier chaos replaced by a calm. With a silent whisper, he leaned in closer, softly brushing against her skin. A moment of tension passed as his words shifted the mood completely. The two shifted together in the bath water, their rhythm intensifying. Her reactions rose further pronounced, each movement testing the limits of restraint. From the side, another young woman lay spent, her form motionless against the ground. She listened faintly as the additional people proceeded in the bath, not knowing of her dazed expression. Beyond the walls, the village rested without speaking. Not a sound disturbed the stillness between homes. Wrapped in a robe, the individual stepped out, taking in the calm surroundings. He noted the silent streets and welcomed the privacy it offered. Werner stepped beyond alone, troubled by the conduct of his allies. He judged the circumstances excessive and attempted to intervene as a person suspicious detected his eye. A determined lady confronted him, accusing him of misconduct. Her tone was firm, her stance unwavering, and the moment shifted into a crowd reckoning. Yard encounters a bold lady accusing him of past crimes. She claims he framed her husband and destroyed her life. She demands accountability, naming Duke Dian as the victim. Yard, confused by the abrupt outburst, she recalls the tragedy her family lost their title and property. Branded as cursed, she was cast out by her own parents, treated like a disease. Yard, unshaken, asserts that Duke Dian's crimes were proven and punished fairly. He begins suspecting the lady is a devoted follower or accomplice of the disgraced Duke. Enraged, she insists Yard owes her assistance, blaming him for her misfortune. Yard, bewildered by her demands, tells her she's become detached from reality. Embarrassed and enraged, the lady lashes out as Yard coldly dismisses her appeal. He accuses her of shamelessness and mocks her desperation for money. As tensions escalate, Yard grabs her to stop the outburst. His companion suggests scaring her off, but the lady rants about being left with burdens from Duke Dian. Regardless of the disorder, Yard sees potential in her. He declares he has a suitable task in thoughts and refuses to let her walk away. Cornered and helpless, she stumbles. Yard, unwavering, responds with feigned courtesy, preparing to gesture. He at last offers her a standing work at his place in exchange for basic necessities and a minor wage. Lucia lowers her gaze, conflicted but unable to refuse. Yard assures her the arrangement's spirit be basic, making her no room to argue. Reluctantly, she accepts the offer. Yard agrees, remarking that it's yet a better fate than disgrace. Their deal is sealed at the Werner residence. Upon arrival, Yard introduces her as a fresh employee. Although officially labeled a servant, the atmosphere suggests deeper expectations beneath the surface. Lucia is placed under Tia's care, an elf who quietly acknowledges the responsibility. Yard assigns Lucia to help with his experiments. Startled by the aura of grim elves, Lucia questions her position. Uncertain and nervous, she demands clarification about what's expected of her form. The quiet elf, assures Yard that Lucia poses no menace. She praises Lucia's value, subtly watching her discomfort. Afterward, Lucia is brought to a dim stone hall. Yard calls it a special job, the air heavy with unease and secrecy. Lucia is restrained by magical cuffs. She panics, accusing Yard of betrayal, as distant energy binds her limbs. Yard feigns calmness, brushing aside her dread. He mocks her anxiety whereas asserting innocence, insisting he's not trying to hurt her. As Lucia resists, Yard prepares a tool. He commands Elle to help, assigning her the task of attracting a magic crest. Lucia lies restrained as the test begins. Yard explains that spirit stones, mighty arcane energy sources, are being extracted through her. The process is painful, yet Yard insists on its necessity. He explains he's aiming for a consistent method of energy production. A wave of energy erupts nearby Lucia's form. Yard views her suffering as a minor cost for maintaining a lavish life in this world. Once the procedure ends, Lucia collapses in exhaustion. Her form is now marked by unusual patterns. Panicked, she discovers the marks won't come off. They're permanent, drawn with magical ink that fuses into the skin. Yard introduces a fresh artifact, calling it a toy, curious to see how effective its spirit be. Lucia reacts intensely, her form overwhelmed by an abrupt wave of magical influence. Regardless of her opposition, the sigils etched into her start responding. The symbols activate further, absorbing surrounding energy and amplifying the effects. Yard notes the enchantment's success, watching her body's involuntary response to the magic's function. As the process continues, Elle monitors from the side. The arcane energy coalesces, preparing for extraction in the form of spirit stones. Yard, focused on maximizing efficiency, makes adjustments. He comments on her body's limitations, paying no thoughts to her distress. The young woman pauses at the doorway, sensing something unusual in the chamber. She turns away, uncertain whether she's allowed to stay or leave. Faced with an unexpected task, she's reminded of her position as an apprentice. The coercion to comply weighs heavier than her delay. Although reluctant, she nods in quiet agreement. Her master's expectations are firm, making no chamber for questions. Each moment stretches her resolve, pushing boundaries she didn't expect to cross. The lesson determines not with clarity, but with quiet submission and unspoken knowledge carved into experience. Faced with judgment, the maid's control crumbled as coercion mounted. Her attempts to bargain were desperate, promises of obedience spilling out as she sought mercy. Submission replaced opposition, her previously defiance unraveling under firm command. Any plea for leniency was dismissed, making no chamber for negotiation or escape. Close by, a quiet observer fought with the sounds echoing through the room. Although her palms attempted to muffle the noise, the mental weight remained inescapable. Weary, the maid collapsed, her power spent and spirit subdued. Marks of the ordeal lingered as the air collapsed yet nearby her. Tears traced silent remorse throughout her expression. A cold alarm reminded her to reflect and not once forget her place anew. The girl fought to move, her form weakened as she dragged herself across the cold ground. Behind her, the individual kept silent, his expression unreadable. Beyond, the world bore on undisturbed. Within, a command was given to clean up following the ordeal. In a study, the individual examined a glowing stone, reflecting on the experiment's success. He viewed the young woman not as an individual, but as a vessel useful for magical advancement and further plans.
Lucia, once a honorable princess, was previously deceived by a malicious sorcerer. Cursed with unusual markings, her dignity shattered, she was taken prisoner and stripped of her title and strength. Her fresh life was cruel. Each day brought humiliation and labor. Regardless of her suffering, Lucia declined to surrender to despair. Her spirit remained unbroken. Compelled into servitude, she disguised her pride behind a servant uniform. Although it pained her, she was determined to succeed, proving her worth even in this degraded position. Yet clumsiness turned against her. Another dish collapsed, attracting irritation and shame. Scorn continued her failures. Harsh words echoed in the halls, questioning her value completely. Lucia, angered by insults, snapped back at the criticism. Her pride as a servant fought with the condescension of others, even when they shared the identical uniform. Yet seen as lesser due to her fallen honorable status, she was mocked further. Her inability to contribute even the smallest dues became a fresh injury to her dignity. Determined to redeem personally, she volunteered for kitchen duty. Confidence filled her until a minor mishap shifted into a noisy disaster. In a chain reaction of disorder, she slipped and activated a messy accident, attracting awkward stares. Weary and demoralized, she silently agreed to her limitations and started to adjust her expectations. Hiding behind a tree, Lucia spotted the shadow elf in the field. The sight of her stirred uncomfortable memories and lingering tension. Whispers nearby the property claimed the elf was an apprentice of a mighty mage. Ever since a mysterious event in the basement, her cold stares not once ceased. The elf started casting a high-tier incantation. Lucia's gaze widened as the scarecrow she practiced on bore a striking resemblance to her. With swift precision, the elf released a freezing assault. Ice burst forth, trapping the target in a jagged prison of crystal. Lucia trembled. Was this training, or a veiled attempt on her life? Marched down the hallway, determined. Troubled by recent dangers, she decided to confront the man she believed could restrain the shadow elf's strength. She proceeded to the basement stairs, calculating his routine. Nearby this hour, he'd be in his quarters. Her assumptions, driven on past observations, led her to believe he often indulged in private distractions following tea. Behind closed doors, familiar voices and laughter confirmed her suspicions. His interactions with the staff were plainly intimate. Even the stern-faced servant had not been spared. Whatever control he gripped, it extended beyond mere command. Lucia reminded personally of proper etiquette. Barging in unannounced during private moments wouldn't reflect well on her, no matter the urgency. Yet, interest nudged her forward. With wary palms, she peered through the door, justifying her actions as essential observation. Her investigation was cut short. A tone called from behind, startling her mid-spy. Cornered and embarrassed, she denied any wrongdoing. The man's worry appeared genuine, but his probing gaze detected her trembling shoulders. Prior to she could compose herself, he pulled her close, making her shocked, uncertain whether it was concern or something deeper. As he drew her close, his words oddly comforting called her irreplaceable. Although his phrasing was unusual, it made her chest stir. Lucia fought to find her tone. Conflicted, she asked about his abrupt warmth whereas trying to steady her thoughts. Then came an appeal cryptic yet unsettling. He spoke of extracting magic crystals, his expression unreadable. Alarmed, she tried to objection, but he softly led her away, brushing aside her hesitation. What continued blurred the lines between ceremony and emotion. Sensation staggered her, and although she couldn't understand it completely, Lucia endured another immense moment, her control breaking in plain view as a single marble rolled away. Retreating into the hallway, she silently cursed her circumstances. Frustration and embarrassment left her shaken. Prior to she could recover, a superior confronted her. The mess she left behind was observed, and her lack of responsibility would not go unchallenged.
Yard enjoyed the silent life in his mansion, surrounded by magic implements that simplified every aspect of daily living. His days blended into nights filled with intimate moments alongside the obedient maids who served him without question. That peace was interrupted when a messenger from the palace castle arrived, bringing a summons that was unable to be ignored. Remained prior to the monarch alongside two others. As one of the three called champions, he was tasked with forming an alliance with the elves, indicating the end of peaceful days. Although taken by astonishment, the trio agreed to their role. As Yard left the castle, the looming journey ahead replaced the calm routine he had once treasured. Yard thought on the king's decision, realizing he was previously chosen not just for strength, but for his capacity to navigate distinct cultures. Defeated, he acknowledged that his private experiments would reason to be delayed. Duty yet anew drew him from his calm routine. Sophia neared silently, struggling to mask her sadness. News of Yard's assignment to Reziana meant another painful farewell, far too soon following his last return. Although she agreed to the king's authority, her chest ached. Loneliness pressed against her chest, even as she tried to appear collected. In a quiet answer to her pain, Yard drew her close. Their lips met in a silent embrace, and for a brief moment Yard replied to Sophia's emotions with a gentle touch, wordlessly conveying what he couldn't express aloud. Instead of retreat, their closeness increased, yet their private moment was cut short by an unexpected outburst. A noisy tone interrupted, breaking the atmosphere with abrupt tension. A blonde stranger appeared, shouting indignantly and asserting Sophia as his fiancée. Neither Yard nor Sophia expected such a declaration, their expressions frozen in astonishment. The individual, Thomas, proceeded dramatically, stating he'd declined the engagement numerous times and was being misunderstood. Whereas Thomas rambled about honor and propriety, Yard had detected sufficient. With a sharp tone, he redirected the focus, plainly unmoved by the theatrics prior to him. Thomas's accusations rose louder, asserting Yard had compelled himself on Sophia. His words were exaggerated, painting a distorted version of incidents. Although Sophia tried to calm him, Thomas pressed forward, declaring himself her protector. He declined to forgive Yard, regardless of her emotions. Yard remained collected, replying with a sharp question. His steady gaze unsettled Thomas, who fought to keep his righteous stance. Tension escalated until Thomas cried his challenge. Prior to all demonstrate, he announced a formal duel, unable to back down from his pride. As Sophia pleaded for cause, Thomas dismissed her worry assuredly. He insisted on handling everything, ignoring both her wishes and the reality of the circumstances. Thomas, yet acting on impulse, offered to escort Sophia to her chamber. Prior to Yard could respond, Thomas fled the hall with Sophia in tow. His dramatic tone echoed behind him, setting the duel for the following morning at the combat practice field. Later, Yard discussed the assignment with a grim-skinned elf lady. Though she had lost memories of her past, she confirmed that few knew anything about the elusive wood elves of Resiana. The elves were known for isolation, rarely interacting beyond their forests. Those who left were often met with resentment, even by their own kind. Speculation arose about the High Elves, revered nearly like deities. Their authority remained unchallenged among the woodland clans. Legend spoke of the High Elves, who lived deep inside the woods, dwelling in a magic pool concealed from outsiders. Regardless of their elevated status, the High Elves were rumored to live merely 2 decades. Yard found the information fascinating. The considered of short-lived beings holding immense magical knowledge suggested at mighty secrets waiting to be uncovered. Elsewhere, Thomas burst into his chamber, calling out to a servant. His frustration from the day lingered, and he requested her company without delay. As Yard thought on the day, his irritation simmered. Involvement with Thomas had become an unwanted distraction, dragging him into disorder ahead of a crucial morning royal. At the practice grounds, a crowd assembled under strict supervision. The air buzzed with tension as Yard arrived, uninterested and ready to end the ordeal rapidly. The duel was properly announced: Yard Werned versus Thomas Burkfield. Rules were set: iron swords merely, no magic, and the loser was destined to be banned from further contact with the princess. Certain in his armor, Thomas taunted Yard for appearing without protection. Yard ignored the drama, eager to settle things rapidly. His indifference agitated Thomas, who accused him of mocking the sacred duel. With a shout, Thomas lunged forward as the match started. Fueled by pride and frustration, he swore to make Yard regret accepting the challenge. Yard shifted ahead quietly, adopting a relaxed stance. His opponent mocked it, laughing at what he noticed as a careless opening until Yard shifted. With blinding speed, Yard closed the distance. The impact shattered Thomas's defense prior to he could react, his form thrown backward violently. A devastating energy continued, shaking the ground and sending debris and dust flying. Spectators staggered back, shocked by the vast strength of Yard's strike. Thomas crashed into the far barrier, armor fractured and his spirit shattered. Panic filled his gaze as the reality of loss settled in. With no room for doubt, the official lifted his tone and announced the outcome. Spectators murmured in uncertainty as Thomas lay defeated. Some asked about whether Yard had used magic. Beside him, Sophia praised Yard's technique. His assault was previously a precise application of magical accuracy, enhancing the strength behind a seemingly basic strike. Whereas Thomas was treated on the ground, Yard casually departed silently. He noted that the rules not once mentioned pre-match magic, making no grounds for objection. As Sophia clung to Yard proudly, Thomas screamed in frustration. Loss had embarrassed him, but jealousy burned deeper than injury. Consumed by obsession, Thomas vowed revenge. In his thoughts, the lady he could not to protect now belonged to him and he wouldn't let her go. To uncover details about Resiana, the protagonist and Alex spent hours in the library, combing through records. Yet, aside from Elle's information, no fresh insights surfaced. Elsewhere, Sagami succeeded in contacting a wood elf who once lived in the woods. He clarified village rules and boundaries, alarm against cutting trees inside sacred zones. Returning home, the protagonist was briefly distracted by Tia's affectionate welcome. Her playful gesture suggested she had other plans for the evening. Regardless of her advances, he brought up his pending report, prioritizing duty over comfort. They were then called to prepare for an expedition, making dinner plans with Bansan unfeasible. Yard received an invitation from an honorable residence. Although reluctant, he understood the coercion. Refusing the Earl's family would bring social consequences. He arrived at the aristocratic district, noting the mansion's size. The invite came from the highly individual whose son he had defeated just a day prior to. At the entrance, a cheerful Honorable, Simon Ray Burkfield, greeted him with a wide grin. Yard immediately sensed trouble. As dishes were served, Simon apologized for the duel, showing his son's fixation on Sophia, acknowledged his position and consented to lift the restraining order if the son revealed remorse. Simon nervously acknowledged worry over the duel's impact, remembering how his son was previously close with the princess since childhood. Trying to ease tension, he started a story about a past evening party. Yard, silently watching, wondered if the misunderstanding came from Simon's delusions. Noticing Thomas's absence, Yard inquired. Simon disclosed the boy was under confinement and banned to leave his chamber. Suspicion rose. Yard subtly triggered magic to probe Simon's motives, curious whether he'd hide behind honorable status. Under quiet coercion, Simon begged for aid. Yard, unamused, hoped Thomas was handling things better on his end. Yard quietly assessed the circumstances, understanding the mansion was tightly secured against any retaliation. Rising from his seat, he politely excused himself, citing urgent business elsewhere. The Earl, disappointed, tried to prolong the meeting, yet eager to learn further about Yard's recent operations in Goethe. Prior to anyone could respond, Yard used an advanced teleportation incantation, vanishing immediately. Beyond, disorder had already burst out. An explosion shook the ground, and guards scrambled to recover. A person had launched an assault just moments following Yard's departure. From a distance, Yard observed with narrowed gaze. His expression remained cold and unreadable as he processed the implications of what had just transpired. Yard arrived the palace hall unannounced, catching the occupants off guard. His tone cut through the silence, questioning the guard's failure. Clinging tightly to Sophia, Thomas insisted his actions were justified. He claimed she welcomed him, repeating that her desires aligned with his aura. The circumstances took a darker turn. Sophia, plainly unwell, fought to respond. Yard's sharp gaze picked up on the signs something was wrong. Laughter filled the chamber as the Earl mocked Yard. Holding Sophia close, he reveled in his perceived triumph. Elsewhere, an ancient binding ceremony echoed in Yard's thoughts. A vow, once broken, cast magical consequences. With collected precision, Yard tossed a token toward his opponent. Calm words continued declaring that the boundary was previously passed and something irreparable was previously broken. A heartbeat afterward, the chamber emptied. Thomas spun in astonishment, unable to locate Yard. Then, with terrifying clarity, Yard reappeared behind him, radiating controlled fury. Beyond, an intense wave of magical energy erupted from the building, shaking the air. It was hardly an alarm, it was authority released. Sophia, gradually regaining consciousness, stirred in uncertainty. Her blurred vision started to obvious as warmth replaced the previously haze. She awoke to find personally in Yard's arms, protected and calm. Thomas, now trembling, pleaded for release. Staggered by guilt and shame, Sophia admitted her emotions. She believed she was unable to anymore stand beside Yard following what had occurred, her tone trembling with pain. Yard replied quietly, his gaze steady. He reminded her that the real culprit was a person who exploited additional people through control. Softly, he assured her that she bore no blame. Moving closer, Yard announced that his emotions were unchanged. No matter what had happened, his fondness for her remained powerful. Sophia's tears collapsed without payment. As he embraced her, she understood his acceptance was unwavering. Although touched by darkness, she wasn't dropped. Afterward, he introduced her to a facility from his homeland, a basic bathhouse. In a silent room, the two remained close as steam rose softly from a bath. The lady hesitated, plainly unaccustomed to such closeness, while the man quietly assisted her. His movements became further deliberate, prompting a mixture of astonishment and inner warfare in her. She voiced uncertainty, torn between her mind and his actions. He paused, reading her delay. As contact increased, her emotions swelled. With palms locked above her, she surrendered to the moment, uncertain if she'd regret it but unable to pull away. Afterward, the atmosphere shifted. The focus shifted elsewhere. News spread of another individual, disgraced and punished for wild conduct. Prior to departing, he gave her a ring, alarmed that he couldn't ensure her safety in his absence. She agreed to it, puzzled yet quiet. Understanding it was a protective artifact, she was staggered. It promised opposition against grim forces, and to her, it felt deeply private. Not knowing of its routine use in his household, she beamed with joy, believing it to be a symbol of commitment. Certain in her fresh role, she observed him leave, assured that she was now protected and cherished. On the day of the expedition to Leshiana, a team assembled by the gates, preparing to board the carriage for departure. Yard and his selected allies bid farewell to those staying behind, with a cleric bringing her blessings as they left on their journey. Clarified his strategy traveling with a minor team, no soldiers, acting only as an envoy of the alliance. Doubts arose when one companion, deemed unfit for chores, was chosen. The staff asked about Yard's decision. That evening, Yard personally persuaded the young woman, entrusting her with the responsibility of managing his property in his absence. Due to the previous night's discussions, Yard rode the wagon through the plains with little sleep, exhaustion creeping in. As the team stopped near a stream, they took a brief moment to rest and feed the horses watching the silent sky. Whereas riding, one of the girls spotted their following destination and excitedly pointed out the town coming into view. The wagon rolled past a wooden gate, marking the edge of a settlement near the woods of Leshian. That evening, the team received instructions to rest well prior to entering the woods at dawn. Yard stretched his limbs following the extended ride, his form weary from hours of stillness. Although he longed to walk and relax, duty called. Upon entering town, he observed something was off. The locals bore hollow expressions, drained of vitality, their gaze devoid of hope. Walking further, he found most shops shut tight. Confused, Yard asked about the abnormal silence blanketing the wide range. An aged man approached and identified Yard as a traveler and a mage. Gratefully, he voiced belief that salvation might at last come. Abruptly, the elder collapsed prior to Yard, pleading desperately for aid, begging him to save their cursed town. Yard stopped the aged man from hurting himself and urged him to explain the circumstances quietly. Originally, the townsmen could fend them off. But things worsened after a grim wizard assumed command of the thieves, making the villagers powerless. Their latest assault was savage. Young girls were abducted, and the townspeople lost their last bit of hope. Despite noticing the tragedy, Yard initially declined to help, stating his team was already on an important mission elsewhere. Desperate, the aged man clung to him, pleading with his last power. Yard identified the pattern yet anew. A person begged him to divert from his path. Yard was startled when the mentally crushed townspeople abruptly sprang toward him, mumbling incoherently about women and hope. Confused and staggered, he asked about why he constantly found himself in these chaotic messes, especially when no one else seemed to step up. Eventually, Yard gave in. With silent resignation, he departed with a companion, entering the close-by woods despite his earlier hesitation. Attempting to redirect the responsibility, Yard pointed fingers at Alex. Instead of relief, he received a lecture on urgency and priorities in crises. Elsewhere, the elven young woman smiled resolutely. Having taken up the task alongside Yard, she sensed certain. Whereas searching the woods, Yard's elf companion discovered fresh footprints among the brush, prompting them to follow the trail deeper between the trees. She climbed rapidly up a tree, scanning the wide range from above. From her vantage point, she spotted a cave to the south and reported its location. Watching two guards stationed suspiciously at the entrance, they concluded it was the bandits' hideout without a doubt. Seeing an opportunity, Yard chose to let his disciple handle the circumstances alone as a test of her training. Determined to prove personally, the elf girl agreed to the task with fiery resolve, ready to see his expectations and show her worth. The elf girl neared the bandits assuredly, attracting their attention. Amused by her appearance, they mistook her for a lost traveler and mocked her suggestive outfit. One bandit tried to touch her, but was immediately repelled by a magical barrier, his form freezing from the backlash. The commotion alerted additional people in the cave. One of the gang leaders announced that no mage could face so many foes alone, and ordered his men to prepare for fight. Charging in with a great axe, the brute rushed toward her, certain in his power and numbers. Unshaken, she launched a devastating magical counterattack. With sharp precision, she hit down their advance, declaring their efforts meaningless against her strength. As chaos burst out, one bandit cried in frustration, watching his comrades fall before the girl's overwhelming magical coercion. The additional people tried to regroup, ordering a full attack. Undeterred, she quietly readied her next incantation, calling upon natural forces. Yard observed from a distance, quiet and watchful. With a single command, she released Geyser, a mighty eruption of water magic that launched her enemies skyward, instantly neutralizing the menace. Following the fight, she gazed to Yard with pride, eager for his response. Bodies lay scattered throughout the ground, defeated. Yard acknowledged the complexity of her spell work, admiring her technique but critiquing the potential peril. Although amazed, He noted the risk of cave fall due to hostages. Neared the shattered cave entrance, noting the destruction. With the initial menace handled, he reminded his disciple of the remaining task. Abruptly, a fresh form emerged. The lady criticized them, certain they knew nothing about their opponent. Identifying personally as Adriana, a dragon slayer, she stood bravely as their next formidable foe.